Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the Bird's Nest Podcast. I'm Joe Donahue. Thank you so much for joining us. The Eagles knew what the goal was going into today, and now they know the path to get there. This evening, as we're recording this, the NFL released the 2026 schedule, and the Philadelphia Eagles know the order in which they are going to face their opponents. And this is always accompanied by a barrage of social media pushes from all 32 NFL teams that really makes this event sort of the Super Bowl of team social media accounts. And there's always some really interesting and really creative takes on how do we get the schedule out to fans from teams all across the league. And I definitely encourage you to check them out because I'm sure that the social media teams put in a lot of work. For the Philadelphia Eagles this year, the Eagles went with a unfiltered reaction, just putting 5 of their players, Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, Jordan Mailata, Jihad Campbell, and Jordan Davis, all in a room, and they went through each game one by one and walked through it. And there were definitely some good moments in this. There were definitely some really humorous interactions among the 5 guys that were there. But the video as a whole didn't really land with me, and just saying that simply because we know how this team approaches each opponent, right? You're not going to get any kind of exuberant reactions from some of these folks. Jalen Hurts is very, very much not going to wear his emotions on his sleeve. Saquon Barkley very much is the same way. There were some really interesting interactions between Jordan Davis and Jihad Campbell, and that was definitely funny. And when all 5 of them were interacting, well, it was great. But this particular style of video, just simply knowing how this team approaches each game and how this team goes into each week and faces each opponent, they're very much an even-keeled, we're going to lock in, we're going to focus on the opponent that's right in front of us. And I think that doesn't change based off of us seeing this video. So yes, it was fun. Yes, it was a little bit of a great look behind the scenes at these guys. It wasn't the worst video in the world, but there was definitely significant opportunity for future years, especially when you consider some of the things that the Eagles have done in the past few. The Eagles, in the year that they went into 24-25, where the Eagles won Super Bowl 59, the Philadelphia Eagles did a psychiatric evaluation of Eagles fans, and that was a great video. So this was definitely more middle of the road there. I wouldn't say that this was one of the best videos, but it definitely was not one of the worst videos. So we're going to take a look at each of these games and probably make some predictions that are way too early. Although I will say this, last year I had the Eagles at 11-6, and the Eagles finished at 11-6. And if you don't believe me, you can go back and check that video out. But yes, I did have the Eagles at 11-6 at this time last year. So we'll see what winds up happening this year. The Eagles open up the season with a game against the Washington Commanders, and the Eagles will play that game at home, 4:25 p.m. on Fox. That is September 13th, and I think that this is a game that the Eagles definitely come away with, mostly because the Eagles have not been beaten in Week 1 in the Nick Sirianni era. The Eagles have had, obviously, all off-season to prepare. The Eagles are going to be coming out with a brand new offensive coordinator, some new offensive schemes. I don't think that the Commanders' defense is up for that challenge. I think that the Philadelphia Eagles should come away with this one, especially since it's at home. It's going to be one of the few games that the Eagles have had at home to start the season in recent memory. The Eagles opened last season at home simply because they were the Super Bowl champions. The year before, they were technically the home team, but they were playing that game in Brazil. So you have to go back to pre-COVID to find a game where the Eagles were playing at home in Week 1. So the fact that the Eagles have now had a couple of home games in a row in Week 1 in the last couple of seasons is definitely really good. But the Eagles are undefeated in the Nick Sirianni era in week 1, and I do think that the Eagles will keep that streak up against the Commanders. Week 2 is going to be September 20th. That is going to be at Tennessee, playing the Tennessee Titans. That's going to be a 1 o'clock game on Fox. Week 3 is going to be the Eagles' first of 2 Monday Night Football appearances. The Eagles will play on September 28th in Chicago against the Chicago Bears. And that brings us to week 4 with the Los Angeles Rams that will see the Eagles back at home. That's a 1 o'clock game. And this first stretch of the season will round out with the Eagles going to Tottenham Hotspur Stadium to play the Jacksonville Jaguars in London. That's a 9:30 kickoff on October the 11th. Through that stretch of games, again, I think the Eagles come away with week 1. I think there are a couple of games that the Eagles could potentially lose. I think that the Chicago Bears are still an extraordinary team, and I think that they are a team that needs to be contended with. I also think that the Eagles could drop either the LA Rams or the Jacksonville Jaguars, one of those 2 games. So I think that the Eagles could be as low as 3-2 in that first stretch. That would be where I would feel comfortable with this team. Now, the Eagles could very well be 4-1. I think that if they do lose one game, it would be the Chicago Bears. They could drop another game, but I think that the Eagles would be in that 3-2, 4-1 kind of vein there. So then the Eagles will come back in week 6, and they will play the Carolina Panthers at home. Now, the custom used to be, just because of the intensity of the travel for international games, that teams would have an extended break, that the teams would have an extended week, or it used to even be a bye week when the only games that were being played in London. But that is not going to be the case for the Eagles in week 6. The Eagles will be coming back home playing a 1 o'clock game against the Carolina Panthers. And I think just because of the travel, that could be a game that the Eagles actually wind up losing. Just simply because, again, you have the kind of time difference. You're already going to be jet lagged. You're going to have to come back in and really ramp up, and you're off your rhythm with that kind of substantial travel. The last time the Philadelphia Eagles played internationally was that Brazil game. They played on a Friday night, and then they didn't play again until the Monday Night Football game of week 2, where the Eagles were a Saquon Barkley drop away from defeating the Atlanta Falcons. So the Philadelphia Eagles coming back on such a long trip on a regular week will set them up for probably a loss in that week 6 stretch. Then we have a really tough stretch where we're going to face all 3 of the divisional opponents in a row. The Philadelphia Eagles will face the Dallas Cowboys at home on October the 26th in week 7. That's a Monday Night Football game. They will play the Washington Commanders in Washington on November 1st, and they will play the New York Giants at home on November 8th. And 2 of those games are primetime. So the Dallas Cowboys Monday Night Football, that was the second of the 2 Eagles appearances on Monday Night Football. And the Philadelphia Eagles will play the Washington Commanders on Sunday Night Football over there in Washington, barring any kind of flexible scheduling or anything like that. So the Philadelphia Eagles, I think, will drop one of those 3 games there to the divisional opponents, just because, again, it's really tough back to back with the divisional opponents. You face them so often, they're very unpredictable, and the fact of the matter is that the Eagles went 3-3 in the NFC East last season. So I do think that the Eagles will drop one of the games. I think that the potential culprit for that would be the Commanders, because that will be short week. Even though they're playing Sunday Night Football, it's still potentially going to be a short week for them. So we'll see what winds up happening there. And then the Eagles, I think, will come away with victories against the Cowboys at home and against the Giants at home. The Eagles have a Week 10 bye, and the bye has always come at a great time for the Philadelphia Eagles in the last couple of seasons. So with those 4 games going into the bye, coming back from London, I think that it is entirely reasonable to expect the Eagles to go 2-2 in that stretch. So if you're tracking, that puts the Eagles at a 5-4 record at worst, potentially a 6-3 record going into that Week 10 bye. So they're still a plus 500 team. Coming off of the bye, the Philadelphia Eagles have some interesting matchups, starting with the Battle of Pennsylvania. It's going to be November 22nd at Lincoln Financial Field. It's the Philadelphia Eagles taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers, 4:25 p.m. So that will be an interesting matchup. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how that one pans out there. I think that Nick Sirianni will keep up his streak of being undefeated coming off of the bye. So I think that the Philadelphia Eagles will come away with a victory there. The Eagles will have a short week because they do play on Thanksgiving in Week 12. They will head to Dallas to play in the 4:30 block game. That, again, I think is a game the Eagles could wind up losing. The Eagles have a rough time in Dallas. They've historically been a little bit rough there. But at the same time, the Eagles very easily could come away with that victory. Again, division games are very hard to predict, and you have the Philadelphia Eagles wanting to get that turkey at the end of that game. That was something that Saquon remarked on in the video when he was talking about his reactions to playing the Cowboys on Thanksgiving afternoon. I think that one very easily could go either way. Yes, the Eagles have a history of challenges in Dallas, but also you have that energy of wanting to have that turkey leg at the end of the game. So we will certainly see how that pans out. The Eagles' weeks 13 and 14 games will be at Arizona and at home versus the Indianapolis Colts. Now, the Arizona game is a 4 or 5 game. The Indianapolis Colts game is a 1 o'clock game. The Colts game is going to be the return of Shane Steichen, so that will definitely provide some juice to that matchup. And the Eagles will be going back to Arizona and facing off against the Cardinals on that same field where they lost Super Bowl 57. Now, both of those games are extraordinarily winnable. I would say that one of those games could wind up being a trap game. So obviously we'll see what winds up happening there, but I think 2-2, or maybe more realistically 3-1, would be reasonable for the Philadelphia Eagles in that stretch of 4 games. And that brings us to the final 4 games of the season, and the Eagles have another tough stretch ahead of them with a couple of really challenging opponents. The Seattle Seahawks are the reigning Super Bowl champions, and the Philadelphia Eagles will play them in Week 15. That is, fortunately for the Philadelphia Eagles, a home game. The last time that the Eagles played the Seahawks was in that 2023 season, and it was not great for the Philadelphia Eagles. So the fact that the Philadelphia Eagles are playing the Seahawks at home in Philadelphia will give them a little bit of an advantage. It is going to be a Saturday night game, so there is going to be that. Then on Christmas Eve, the Philadelphia Eagles will play the Houston Texans. That's going to be an 8:15 p.m. game on Amazon. So that will be the Eagles' Thursday night appearance. And that will also be a home game as well. So the Texans are a team that has been challenging over the last couple of years, although they had a very up and down season last year. And it turns out actually that Christmas Eve game is going to be the Eagles' home season finale because the Eagles play their final 2 games on the road. The Philadelphia Eagles will play the San Francisco 49ers on January 3rd, Sunday Night Football. That's in San Francisco. And then the Eagles close out the season with Week 18 in MetLife Stadium against the New York Giants. Now, hopefully, the Eagles game against the New York Giants is completely meaningless, and the Philadelphia Eagles will have the division locked up by that point. So because of that, I do think that the Philadelphia Eagles will have 1 loss in that final stretch of games. They could come away with 2 losses in there, but I think it's probably more realistic for the Eagles to have 1 loss. I think that the Eagles will have a little bit of an edge over the Seattle Seahawks simply because they're going to be at home for that game. And as I've said before, the Jalen Hurts-Brock Purdy matchup is always an interesting one to watch. So overall, I think that the Eagles could easily have 13 wins on the season. Now, that having been said, I would say that a reasonable floor for them, again, is that 11-6 threshold. Anything lower than that, and I think we have some concerns about how the season went and what changes need to be made again in the offseason. But I think going into the deep offseason, as we get ready to see the Eagles in OTAs, in minicamp, as the Eagles sit here looking at their schedule, I do think that an 11-6 floor is a reasonable floor. Now, again, I think that they have it in their ability to win more games, and I think that there are definitely a few games in that 11-6 floor that are a little bit of a conservative loss, maybe factoring in a couple of trap games there, especially in that stretch with the Steelers, Cowboys, Cardinals, and Colts there. One of those games could very easily wind up being a trap game. I'm looking particularly at that Cardinals game as a potential trap game. But I think that the Eagles, at this moment in time, have what it takes to lock up another NFC East title. But only time will tell whether or not that happens, and whether or not 11-6 or better is going to be good enough for that to happen. But as always, let me know what you think in the comments below. What are your thoughts about the season ahead? What are your thoughts about the schedule? Why do you think the Eagles are going 17-0? Let me know. And thank you so much to everyone for tuning into the Birds Nest Podcast. You can support the Birds Nest Podcast by liking and subscribing to Birds Nest Media right here on YouTube, as well as by sharing to your social media pages. You can also find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Amazon Podcasts, Spotify, the Odyssey app, and iHeartRadio, pretty much anywhere you get your podcasts. Please visit birdsnestmedia.com for additional Eagles and NFL coverage, and if you feel so inclined to support us in a different way, you can find the link to our Patreon in the description below, or you can join the YouTube channel. You can also find the link to our Patreon at birdsnestmedia.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's go Eagles!